I'm Melissa, 28, female. I live in a quiet city. Center apartment with my partner of 6 years, Emily, and our ridiculously spoiled golden retriever, Gus. I manage a portfolio of upscale residential properties, a job that's demanding but rewarding, allowing me to build a life my 18-year-old self could only have dreamed of. But that dream was born from a nightmare, one where the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally decided their love had one very specific condition. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The chime of the oven timer pulled me from a spreadsheet detailing quarterly maintenance budgets. The scent of roasted garlic and rosemary filled our small but sunlit apartment, a stark contrast to the sterile, scentless home I grew up in. Emily was humming along to a soft melody on the radio, carefully plating the chicken we were having for dinner. This was my life now. It was calm. It was safe. It was a world I had built for myself, brick by painful brick, after my old one was demolished. For a decade, the word family had a different meaning for me. It wasn't the sterile holiday cards from my parents, David and Susan, or the awkward once a year birthday text from my brother, James. Family was Emily, with her warm laugh and steady hands that could stitch up a patient or hold my face with equal care. Family was our close circle of friends, a vibrant mosaic of people who had chosen to be in our lives, not obligated by blood. Family was Gus, who greeted every day with uncomplicated joy. My biological family existed only in the past tense. My father, David, was a man carved from oak and principle. He ran a hardware store in our small hometown, a place where everything had its designated spot and every problem had a straightforward, practical solution. He viewed the world in black and white, and unfortunately for me, I turned out to be a color he couldn't comprehend. My mother, Susan, was his shadow. A retired school secretary, she lived by his rules, her own opinions buried under years of deference. She was a gentlewoman, but her gentleness was a passive force, never strong enough to stand against my father's rigid will. Then there was James, my older brother, the golden child. He followed the path laid out for him without question, business degree, a good job in sales, a sensible wife. He was the son they understood, the one who reflected their values back at them. I was the opposite. I was quiet where he was loud, artistic where he was pragmatic, and as it turned out, I loved in a way they deemed fundamentally wrong. The silence from them wasn't a passive absence. It was an active, suffocating presence in the early years. It was the empty chair at my college graduation. It was the unanswered calls when I was sick with the flu in my tiny dorm room. It was the knowledge that if something terrible happened to me, the first people on my emergency contact list wouldn't even answer the phone. But time has a way of turning sharp pains into dull aches. I learned to live with the phantom limb of a family I no longer had. I focused on my studies, then on my career. As a property manager, my job is to create safe, functional, and beautiful homes for others. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was building communities for strangers while the architects of my own life had condemned the foundation. Emily often asked if I ever thought about reaching out, just to see. She'd say gently, her medical training always pushing for a diagnosis, a potential cure. People can change, Mel. Change requires self-reflection. I'd reply, my voice flat. My father thinks self-reflection is something you do with a mirror to check for shaving cuts. I truly believed that part of my life was over, a book closed and stored on a high shelf. The pain was real, but it was contained. I had built high walls around that part of my heart, and for 10 years they had held strong. I had no idea that a wrecking ball in the form of my brother was already on its way, preparing to smash through everything and force me to look at the rubble of a past I had tried so hard to bury. The silence was about to be broken, not by an apology, but by a demand. The memory is seared into my mind, as vivid as if it happened yesterday. It was the summer after my freshman year of college. I was 18, brimming with the newfound confidence that comes from living away from home for the first time. I was in love, a dizzying, all-consuming first love with a girl from my art history class named Sarah, and I was tired of hiding. I wanted the people who claimed to love me to know the real me. It was naive. I see that now. It was the hope of a child who still believed in fairy tales. I chose a Sunday afternoon, right after lunch. The air in the house was thick with the smell of pot roast and my father's disapproval of the political talk show on TV. James was home from his university for the weekend, sitting on the armchair, scrolling through his phone, already a master of detached indifference. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. "Mom, Dad," I started, my voice trembling slightly. "James, there's something I need to tell you all." 4 pairs of eyes turned to me. My father clicked the TV off with the remote, the sudden silence deafening. His expression was impatient, as if I were a commercial break he had to endure. "I'm gay," I said. The words felt both impossibly large and ridiculously small. "I'm in a relationship with a woman, and I love her." For a moment, nothing happened. My mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a kind of theatrical shock, as if I'd confessed to a crime. James just looked down at his phone again, a flicker of something, annoyance, embarrassment, crossing his face before he smoothed it over. But it was my father's reaction that shattered the world. He didn't yell, not at first. He slowly placed the remote on the coffee table with deliberate precision. He stood up, and the sheer force of his presence seemed to suck the air out of the room. His face was a mask of cold fury. "No," he said, his voice dangerously low. "No, you're not. Dad, I am. This is who I am. This is a phase." He snapped, his voice rising now. "A disgusting, confused phase brought on by some liberal arts college. We didn't raise you to be this. We didn't raise you to be unnatural." The word unnatural struck me like a physical blow. I looked to my mother for help, for any sign of support. She just sat there, wringing her hands, her eyes pleading with me. "Don't do this, Melissa. Don't make this harder." Her silence was its own form of violence. "It's not a phase," I insisted, tears welling in my eyes. "This is me." "Then I don't know who you are," he thundered, "because my daughter wouldn't bring this shame into my house. My daughter wouldn't choose this lifestyle." I turned to my brother, my last hope. "James, please." He finally looked up from his phone, his expression unreadable. "Just listen to him, Mel. You're just being dramatic." He shrugged, a gesture of dismissal that cut deeper than my father's rage. He was siding with them. He was choosing the path of least resistance, leaving me to face the storm alone. That was when the door closed. Not just the physical door to the house, but the symbolic one to my childhood, to my family, to everything I had ever known. "As long as you live under my roof," my father said, his voice dropping back to that icy calm, "you will respect my rules, and my rules say that this filth does not exist here. So you have a choice. You can end this nonsense right now and be a part of this family, or you can walk out that door and never come back." There was no real choice. He wasn't asking me to change my mind. He was asking me to erase my soul. The tears streamed down my face as I stood there, utterly broken. I looked at their faces one last time, my father, rigid with righteous anger, my mother, weeping silently into her hands, my brother, already absorbed in his screen as if the conversation was over. They were strangers. I didn't pack a bag. I just turned and walked out. The slam of the front door behind me was the sound of my old life ending. I spent that night on a friend's couch, my body shaking with sobs. The next day, I took a bus back to my college town with $20 in my pocket and never looked back. They never called, not once. The door they closed that day remained shut for 10 years. Life moves on. That's the brutal, beautiful truth of it. The wounds of that day scabbed over, scarred, and eventually became a part of the tapestry of who I am. I finished college by working 3 jobs. I met Emily in my final year. We built a life together, filled with laughter, mutual respect, and the kind of unconditional love I once thought was a myth. The ghosts of my past were just that, ghosts. They had no power in the world I now inhabited, until a Tuesday evening in late spring. Emily was on a late shift at the clinic, and I was curled up on the couch with Gus, half, watching a documentary in halves, scrolling through work emails on my tablet. The intercom buzzed, a harsh, unexpected sound in the quiet of the evening. I wasn't expecting anyone. "Yes," I said, pressing the talk button. "It's James." A voice crackled back, a voice I hadn't heard in person for a decade. For a second, my mind went blank. James, here. It felt impossible, like a character from a book suddenly appearing in my living room. My first instinct was a surge of pure adrenaline, the flight response kicking in. I wanted to pretend I wasn't home, to just let the silence answer him, but a deeper, more complicated curiosity won out. "I'm coming down," I said, my voice sounding distant to my own ears. My hands were trembling as I clipped the leash on Gus, who was thrilled at the prospect of an unscheduled walk. The elevator ride down felt like a slow descent into a past I never wanted to revisit. What could he possibly want? Had something happened to them? A morbid part of me felt a flicker of something I couldn't name. Not grief, but a cold, clinical interest. I saw him standing on the pavement outside the glass doors of my building. He looked older. The easy confidence he'd worn like a second skin in his youth had been replaced by something more tired. He had the expensive suit and haircut of a successful sales manager, but there were lines of stress around his eyes that weren't there before. He offered a tight, awkward smile as I stepped outside. "Mel, you look good." "James," I said, my tone flat. I didn't return the compliment. I didn't know what to say. The 10 years of silence stretched between us like a vast, empty canyon. "Nice dog," he said, gesturing lamely at Gus, who was sniffing his polished shoes with suspicion. "Listen, can we talk? Maybe go for a coffee?" "I don't think so," I said immediately. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it right here." I wasn't letting him into my world, not even for the price of a latte. The street was neutral territory. He sighed, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. The salesman's charm was failing him. "Look, I know this is a lot. I know we haven't talked. I'm sorry. The apology was weak, flimsy, and about 10 years too late. Sorry for what, exactly?" I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. "For watching Dad throw me out, for not calling not once to see if I was even alive. You'll have to be more specific." He flinched. "Okay, fine, I deserve that, all of it, but I'm not here about that, not really." He took a deep breath, and the manufactured confidence returned, like a shield he was raising. He was here on a mission. This wasn't a social call. "It's Dad," he said, finally getting to the point. "He's sick, Mel. He's really sick." I waited, my expression unmoving. I felt a strange detachment, as if he were talking about a character in a movie. The man he was describing was not my father. My father was a force of nature, an immovable object. The idea of him being weak, being sick, didn't compute. "He has leukemia," James said, his voice dropping. "He's been going through chemo, but it's not working. The doctors say his best chance, his only chance really, is a bone marrow transplant." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. I could see where this was going. The entire conversation, the sudden appearance after a decade of neglect, it was all leading to one inevitable point. He was a messenger, but he wasn't here to deliver an olive branch. He was here to deliver a demand, wrapped in the guise of a desperate plea. "They tested me," James continued, his gaze finally meeting mine. "I'm not a match. Mom's not a match. You're the only one left, Mel. We need you to get tested." The air suddenly felt thin, hard to breathe. "You need me to get tested," I repeated, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of disbelief. For 10 years, I was a ghost, a non-entity, ashamed to be hidden. Now, in their moment of desperation, I was suddenly the only one left. I wasn't Melissa, their daughter or sister. I was a potential cure, a biological resource to be tapped. "Yes," James said, a note of pleading entering his voice. "The doctors say siblings have the highest chance of being a perfect match. You could save his life. His life." I let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor. The man who told me I was unnatural filth and threw me out of his house, the man who was perfectly content to let me disappear, that's the life we're talking about. James had the decency to look uncomfortable. He shifted his weight from one foot to the other. "I know how it sounds, but he's our father. Our father," I shot back. "He stopped being my father that day, James. You all made that perfectly clear. You think you can just show up 10 years later and ask me to undergo a painful medical procedure for him, as if nothing happened. Of course not," he said quickly, trying to backtrack. "Look, we know things were bad, Dad. He's stubborn. He's from a different generation. He doesn't know how to say he was wrong." It was the classic excuse, the one used to sandpaper the rough edges of unforgivable behavior. A different generation was not an excuse for cruelty. It was a cop-out. "So he's still the same man, then?" I stated. "He hasn't changed. He's just dying. He's scared," James said softly. "And Mom is falling apart. Please, Melissa, just think about it. It's not just for him. It's for Mom. It's for the family." There was that word again, family, a word they had redefined for me. It was a conditional club, and I had been kicked out for violating the terms and conditions. Now they wanted to offer me a temporary membership pass because they needed something. This wasn't about forgiveness or reconciliation. This was a transaction. Let me get this straight. I said, my voice dangerously calm. "You want me to come back, get tested, and if I'm a match, donate my bone marrow, and what happens after that? Do I get invited back for Christmas, or do I go back to being the shameful secret once he's healthy again?" James didn't have an answer. The silence was his confession. They hadn't thought that far ahead. They had only thought about the immediate problem, the dying patriarch. The fine print of this deal was that I was expected to save his life and then quietly disappear again. My role was to be the miracle, not the daughter. "Does he even know you're here?" I asked. James hesitated. "He knows we're looking for a donor. He doesn't know I came to you specifically. He wouldn't ask. Of course he wouldn't. His pride would never allow it. He wouldn't ask for my help, but he would take it. He would accept my marrow, the very essence of my body, a body he had rejected, without ever having to humble himself. The hypocrisy was breathtaking. So I'm supposed to do this out of the goodness of my heart for a man who broke it. I shook my head, a sense of cold clarity washing over me. "You didn't come here to ask for my forgiveness, James. You came here to ask for a favor, a very, very big favor. You're not trying to rebuild a bridge. You're just trying to get across the river because your side is on fire." I looked at my brother, at the stranger in the expensive suit who shared my DNA but none of my life. He wasn't a villain. He was just weak, a man who had chosen the easy path his entire life and couldn't understand why I hadn't done the same. "I need to go," I said, pulling on Gus's leash. "You have my number, I assume. Don't use it unless it's an emergency. And James," I added, turning back to him, "this doesn't count as one." I walked back into my building, leaving him standing on the pavement, the unwanted messenger with a terrible request. My apartment, my sanctuary, suddenly felt like the only safe place in the world. When Emily got home an hour later, she found me sitting in the dark, staring at the city lights. She knew instantly that something was wrong. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a jumbled mess. James, the leukemia, the transplant, the sheer audacity of it all. She listened without interruption, her expression a mixture of shock and deep empathy. When I finished, she wrapped her arms around me and just held me. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly after a long silence. "I don't know," I confessed, my voice barely a whisper. "A part of me, a very loud part, wants to tell them to get lost, to let them deal with the consequences of their own actions. And the other part," I sighed, leaning my head against her shoulder. "The other part is screaming, what if he dies, and what if you could have stopped it? It's complicated." Over the next few days, the conversation with James replayed in my mind on a loop. His words echoed in my quietest moments. You could save his life. It was a heavy burden to place on someone you had discarded. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of obligations I had never agreed to. An obligation to a father who didn't want me, a mother who didn't protect me, and a brother who didn't defend me. My initial anger began to cool, replaced by a strange, hollow feeling. I started to dissect the situation logically, the way I would analyze a problematic property lease. What were the terms? What were the liabilities? The transaction was simple, my physical discomfort and risk in exchange for his life. But the emotional cost was immeasurable. To even consider it, I would have to open a door I had nailed shut and barricaded a decade ago. I would have to face them, see them, and let them back into my orbit. Doing so would mean acknowledging that their hold on me wasn't entirely broken. It would mean giving them power over my emotional well-being again. "He's your father, Mel," Emily said one evening as we were cooking dinner. It wasn't an argument, just a gentle statement of fact. "You don't owe him anything, not your forgiveness, and certainly not your bone marrow. But you do owe it to yourself to make a decision you can live with, whatever that is." She was right. This wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about revenge or forgiveness. It was about me. It was about what kind of person I wanted to be and what kind of life I wanted to live. Could I live with the knowledge that I let him die when I might have had the power to save him? I spent a lot of time thinking about the man himself, not the monster from my memories, but the person, David, the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who patiently baited my hook on fishing trips, who smelled of sawdust and coffee. Those memories were real, too. They existed alongside the memory of his cold eyes and cruel words. Could I separate the two? But then I thought about the price. The price wasn't just the medical procedure. The price was validation. If I did this, they would see it as my admission of guilt. They would interpret my act of compassion as a sign that I was finally coming to my senses, that I was choosing family over my lifestyle. It wouldn't bring them closer to understanding me. It would just reinforce their belief that they were right all along. They would take my gift and never acknowledge the giver. I would save his body, but in doing so, I would sacrifice a piece of my own soul, the part that I had fought so hard to reclaim. I realized the choice wasn't about life and death. It was about self-preservation. For 10 years, I had survived without them. I had healed without them. I had built a life, a beautiful, loving, authentic life, without their approval. To go back now, even for a noble cause, would be a betrayal of the person I had become. It would be an insult to the 18-year-old girl who walked out that door with nothing but her own integrity. The decision settled in my heart not with a crash of thunder, but with a quiet, profound sense of peace. It was a weight lifting. My life, my body, my choice. The power he had wielded over me for so long was an illusion, and I was finally ready to dispel it. I picked up my phone and sent a text to James. I need to see them, all three of you. I have my answer. We agreed to meet at a neutral location, a small, quiet cafe in a town halfway between my city and their home. The place was sterile and impersonal, which felt appropriate. I brought Emily with me. I wasn't facing them alone again. Her presence was my anchor, a silent testament to the life I had chosen. They were already there when we arrived, sitting at a booth in the corner. Seeing them together for the first time in a decade was jarring. My father looked smaller, diminished. The illness had stolen his color, leaving his skin pale and sallow. He looked frail, and for a fleeting moment I felt a pang of pity. My mother looked exhausted, her face etched with worry. James sat beside them, looking uncomfortable, the reluctant ambassador for this broken kingdom. Their eyes landed on Emily, and I saw a flicker of the old judgment in my father's gaze. He didn't acknowledge her. My mother gave a tight, barely perceptible nod. Melissa. My mother said, her voice thin, "Hello, Susan, David." I replied, my tone level. I wasn't here to play happy families. I sat down opposite them, with Emily beside me. The silence was thick with unspoken history. "Thank you for coming," James finally said, breaking the tension. "I'm not here for a reunion," I said, getting straight to the point. "You asked for something from me. I'm here to give you my answer, but first I have something to say." I looked directly at my father. "For 10 years, you have pretended I don't exist. You threw me out of your home because you couldn't accept who I am. You never called, never wrote, never asked if I was okay. You erased me, and now you need me." He stared at a spot on the table, refusing to meet my eyes. "We did what we thought was right." He mumbled, his voice raspy. "Right." I repeated, my voice rising slightly. "Was it right to leave your child homeless? Was it right to teach me that your love was conditional? Was it right to cause a pain so deep that it has taken me a decade to heal from it?" My mother started to cry softly. "Melissa, please, he's sick." "I know he's sick," I said, turning to her. "That's the only reason we're here. But his sickness doesn't erase the past. And where were you? You stood by and let it happen. Your silence was just as loud as his anger." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. This wasn't about yelling, it was about truth. "Before I can even consider what you've asked of me, I need to hear one thing. I need to hear you say you were wrong. I need an apology, a real one. Not I'm sorry you feel that way, but I'm sorry for what I did. I need you to acknowledge that the person you threw away is the same person you're asking to save you, and I need you to acknowledge her." I said, gesturing to Emily. "Her name is Emily. She is my partner. She is my family, and she deserves your respect." The cafe was silent except for my mother's quiet sobs. I watched my father. This was his chance. This was the moment where he could choose connection over pride, love over dogma. I saw the struggle on his face. He looked at me, his eyes filled with a complex mixture of fear, pain, and that old, stubborn pride. He cleared his throat. I am sick, Melissa. I need my daughter's help." It was a deflection, not an apology. "I am not just your daughter," I said softly. "I am a gay woman. You cannot ask for the part of me that can save you while rejecting the part of me that you hate. It doesn't work that way. It's all or nothing." He finally looked at me, and his eyes were as hard as they had been 10 years ago. I cannot approve of your lifestyle. It's against everything I believe, but you are my flesh and blood. It is your duty to help your family." And there it was, duty, not love, not remorse. He still believed he was right. He believed I owed him this, that my very biology obligated me to save him, even as he continued to condemn my soul. He wanted a miracle, but he wasn't willing to pay the price. The price was one simple, heartfelt apology, and it was too high for him. I felt a profound sadness, but also a profound sense of release. He had made my decision for me. I stood up. Emily stood with me. "Then I have my answer for you," I said, my voice clear and steady. "The answer is no. I will not be your donor. I will not save you. You had a choice between your pride and your daughter, and you chose your pride. Now you can live or die with that choice, just as I have lived with mine." I turned and walked away, Emily's hand finding mine. I didn't look back. The price of his miracle was my dignity, and it was a price I was no longer willing to pay. The aftermath was a strange mix of turmoil and tranquility. James called me a dozen times that evening. I didn't answer. He left frantic, angry voicemails. He called me selfish, cruel, a monster. He said I was sentencing our father to death. I listened to the first one and then deleted the rest without hearing them. His words had no power over me anymore. They were the desperate ramblings of a man who couldn't comprehend a world where duty wasn't a weapon to be used against others. A week later, a letter arrived. It was from my mother. Her handwriting was shaky, the pages stained with what I assumed were tears. It was a long, rambling plea. She talked about the good times, the family, vacations, my childhood. She said my father was a good man who was just set in his ways. She begged me to reconsider, to not let anger guide me, to be the bigger person, but she never once said they were wrong. She never acknowledged the pain they caused. The entire letter was an exercise in emotional manipulation designed to make me feel guilty, to position me as the villain in their tragedy. I read it once, folded it neatly, and put it in a box of things I would never look at again. Then I blocked their numbers, all of them. Emily was my rock. She didn't tell me I was right or wrong. She just supported my decision. You chose yourself, she said one night as we sat on the balcony watching the sunset. After a lifetime of being told you were not worth choosing, you finally chose yourself. That's the bravest thing I've ever seen. There were moments of doubt, of course. Late at night, the what-ifs would creep in. What if he died? Would I feel regret? Would his death haunt me? I had to confront the reality that my decision had a very real, very final potential consequence. But as I examined that fear, I realized my guilt wasn't about his potential death. It was the residual guilt that had been programmed into me since childhood. The feeling that I was responsible for other people's happiness, that my needs should always come last. My decision to say no wasn't an act of revenge. Revenge is about causing pain. I didn't want my father to suffer. I just refused to be the cure for a sickness that went far deeper than his bone marrow. My decision was an act of liberation. It was the final, definitive severing of a toxic tie. It was me, standing on my own 2 feet, declaring that my life, my peace, and my well-being mattered. I don't know what happened to my father. I made a conscious choice not to find out. His life and its outcome is no longer my story to tell or my burden to carry. His fate is in the hands of science or God or whatever else he believed in. My fate is in my own hands. The scars from that childhood, from that day I was disowned, will always be there. They are a part of me, but they no longer ache. They are just reminders of a battle I fought and won. They are the proof that I survived. My life is here in this apartment with the woman I love and our goofy dog. It's in the communities I help manage, in the friendships I cherish, and in the quiet moments of peace I fought so hard to earn. I didn't get the family I was born into, so I built one that was better. One that is defined not by obligation or duty, but by unconditional love and acceptance. And that is a miracle worth more than any cure.